Today we're going to cover morality. And, it's a touchy subject, right? So how am I going to do this? Because even if I call it morality, I've just probably sawed off, a third of people who would remotely click on it and listen to it because they think they're going to get lectured about morality personally. This probably will not have anything personally to do with anyone unless you're just taking it personal because perhaps you think that you have crossed a line you don't want anyone else to know. You ever run into those people? Let's put it this way. I think I talked about this a million years ago, but I took my employees out to lunch one day, and one of the guys in the back seat had lost like 60, 70 pounds. And there was a girl in the front seat who was, I guess, more overweight than she wanted to be. But she's a big girl anyway. Gorgeous girl. But the entire time he's trying to tell us how excited he is for losing weight. She's in the front seat taking it all personal. And so he was just saying how he did it, trying to share the magic sauce, right? And she just turns around and looks at him and says, well, it's hard. It's hard to eat right. And everyone's like, whoa, no one's even talking to you. Wow, you just projected and embarrassed yourself, right? So if there's anyone who takes offense to this episode, it's probably going to be a flavor of that, right? But what drew me to this subject matter? Because I typically don't just sit around going, what should I cover today? I don't know, throw a dart at some words in a dictionary and then cover it. I have had an odd experience in the last, I'd say, 2 months, watching things I don't usually watch, which are shows on television, on pay-per-view, like HBO sort of things, right? I've gone back and watched a few that I never watched before. And you've heard me mention them. Rome, which was from 2003, 2005. Carnival, which I absolutely love, which I've seen a million times. So watch it again. Game of Thrones, I've seen quite a few episodes of that. Sometimes it's a series that shows at my smoke shop, and then if you're not there every single day when they show it, you miss episodes. So sometimes I just get a bunch of episodes, but not all of them in a row. But that we always talk about on this show, and I think a lot of people talk about the fact that at the turn of a decade, it would seem that a plan that has been planned out hatches. That some objective gets pushed up. In the early 90s, it was essentially The Simpsons, making Bart Simpson the cool kid who didn't study, was a loser, and his sister was an annoying, nagging nerd. And then, of course, we got great music, but it was saddled with grunge, right? Dress poor, even if you're rich. On the back channels, we got goth and emo, which is more of the rich white kids dressing like they're somehow repressed and cry all the time, right? Effeminizing the living shit out of dudes, right? Our movie stars went from Clint Eastwood to Johnny Depp. I have nothing against Johnny Depp. I love that guy. I mean, he's done unbelievable roles in his life. Ed Wood being one of my favorites, right? But you weren't allowed to be in films if you were big and strong. And I think that's starting to change here with this mid-decade thing here. Of the 20 teens. I can't wait till we get to the 2020s, and then we can just say, yeah, in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 40s, because right now it's, how do you talk about 1910 to 1919? Well, the teens of the 20th century. That sounds horrible. But the absolute morality shakedown of these shows is mind-blowing. And it's coming from a single source of HBO, which I think is very interesting. And again, I support freedom of speech completely. And these shows are amazing. You should see them. I personally, I bought Carnival. And my buddy bought Rome. Oh, the other one was Deadwood. Fantastic show. But here's what I want to ask in this episode, which is, and I'm a huge Larry Flint fan too, who had to fight a bunch of repression and was actually shot and paralyzed because of his opinion to shut him up, right? Are we just kids scoffing at the guidance from our elders when we throw out what has been classically defined as morality, the rules of life that overall give us more happiness than sadness? I think that's really what morality is. Now, in this generation, what's interesting, and I'm, everyone who's young and alive right now, I would say that we have felt we have this amazing freedom, at least in America, and I'm sure most places in the world, where we can do pretty much anything behind closed doors. And we could probably find a group of people that do things behind closed doors. No matter how sick and perverted, no matter how satanistically illegal, there's a group of people that do it. And the weird thing is that principle by which I talk about, if we don't make standards in our lives and define our own personal integrity, then really bad behavior starts to kind of mix in with all the other behavior. For instance, I'm from the Midwest, and Dodge City was literally 300 miles from my hometown. And we all know that the cowboys of that era were romanticized up as being more ruthless than they really were, and blah, blah, blah. But there was a lot of bad son of a bitches back in those days, and they did kill the living shit out of people. And they were fucking chaotic. They walked in the room with crazy eyes, and if you weren't a good gunsmith yourself, this guy, and they're weasels, right? Some of these fuckers would shoot you in the back of your head just because that's how they can get to you. And so you had to make this conscious decision. If I'm going to stay in this room, I got to pick a corner. I got to be ready to draw. If the guy disrespects me, do I shoot him? Because once he disrespects me, then he's put a tag on me that he thinks I'm a pussy. And if he is not struck down in the middle of that disrespect, then he is going to build up a hubris that's going to become dangerous later on. And if the rumor were to go out that the guy could tell me to fuck off at a bar and I didn't do anything, it then makes other people think that they're as strong as me, who may not be, and they might give them their support to him, and he builds a little gang because he's a loudmouth little turd, right? So there's a huge chess game going on when the Wild West used to exist in Deadwood, the Valley of Deadwood, like in was it South Dakota, North Dakota, Tombstone. I mean, all the big cities. Probably a bunch of cities that had this kind of stuff going on that aren't on the map because nobody wrote a story about them, right? But here's what I want you to think about, and you might have the same exact experience. We might try to intellectualize and say, well, morality is always a very relative thing to the day that you're discussing morality. We have a certain standard of morals today in 2016, and they had a different one in 1990, a different one in 1940, etc., etc. Coming from a small town and having relatives around me of the generation of I would say, my grandparents were born between 1910 and 1922. All four of my grandparents. I never saw them. One of my grandfather, the first one born in 1910, died the year I was born, so I don't really know him at all. But the other three, behaved exactly the same in terms of what was considered to be morally acceptable and what was morally unacceptable. And all the other old couples that I would mow their lawns, I would be friends with their grandkids, my parents were friends with them, and I'd go over their house, just dozens and dozens, plus my relatives. They all exuded the same level of morality. No one disagreed. No one said, oh, well, I think stealing's okay, and his other grandparent goes, that's horrible. Nope. It was all bad, right? I can tell you right now, I cannot fathom, and I'm not being facetious here. I cannot fathom showing my any of my grandparents, even my grandfather, 5 minutes of any of the shows I just mentioned. Because the sexuality, the on-point sexual dialogue, the death and horrific visions, the demon is that literally some of these shows have hell and brimstone in them, and it's super dark, and Carnival would be the closest thing I could probably find 5 minutes to show them, to be honest. But Sweargin saying cocksucker in Deadwood. There's this HBO has this utter contest going with how many you must get paid by the use of the word cock in a script nowadays. It's unbelievable. And so I use my grandparents as the litmus test of where we were and where we are today. I'm not casting judgment on where we are today. But what I want to do in this episode is cover some of the areas where I believe that we have endorsed things and we sort of subconsciously or consciously know that those endorsements and those leniencies and those regressions in morality fiber of at least the United States of America, I can't speak for any other country, have not done us any good. Memorial Day weekend just happened here. I was able to have a few really amazing conversations, sitting around barbecues and that kind of stuff with males and females. Now, most of us that are, again, 40 and over, we remember grandparents that had the fibers that I just mentioned to you. And so we have within us at least the knowledge of the pattern of morality that existed, say, up until the turn of the millennium when our grandparents started passing away, right? If your grandparents are still alive and you're in your 40s, then you're one lucky duck. My grandparents were some of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my life, if not the top human beings I've ever had the privilege of spending time with, right? And I have to say that I could probably give that critique to most of my friends' grandparents as well. If I can't, it's simply because I don't know them, not because I have it confirmed otherwise, right? So I want to go down some paths of morality as it might be defined today. Let's go into one that's always an eye catcher: sexuality. Now, the romanticized history of it all is that, and I think this is fairly accurate, that up to about 1955, just before Elvis Presley and Little Richard hit the deck and rock and roll was born, you have a pretty stiff society. We had lived within the same confines of rules about courtship and marriage, about work ethics, how to raise a family. And what was interesting is we have this situation that's a bit like Genesis 3, where man is in the Garden of Eden, and as much as God makes it plentiful and interesting, it becomes boring real fast. And the only game in town is that apple tree. It's like, damn, wonder what that tastes like, you know? Then who tells them that the world's going to be different? Who tells them they have original sin? The devil. And the tension is released. Now, what's interesting about that analogy, and the reason why I bring up that story, that fictional story, is that had God said, here's the deal, man. I'm some weird fucking guy who creates an imperfect creature, but I put you in a perfect place called Garden of Eden, and then I create a perfect rule that you're going to break because you're not perfect. And it has to do with this apple tree, because I'm just an asshole. And if you eat it, here's what's going to happen to you. Childbirthing is going to be very painful. You're going to menstruate and bleed once a month. You're going to notice you're naked. At that point, you will have created the original sin for all of your siblings, and for the rest of eternity, you're going to go through some other imperfect piece of shit human being who's going to extort money out of you, is going to try to tell you that they have the authority to get you back to me. It's just going to be a horrible world, right? All of which the devil created in this particular story, if you pay attention, right? If the story's true, the devil owns the whole story, just so you know. Like, you got it all out of the serpent's mouth, right? But if God had said that's the punishment for breaking this rule, and gave it as much, answer questions for days and days and days, and Adam and Eve went, oh, that sounds like a really bad thing to do now, then we would have had a chance not to eat that apple and forego the entire event that is the Christian/Old Testament religion, which is horrific and childish and stupid and so man-made. So morality in our decision-making processes is very much like the decision in that fabled fictional story of Eden. We had tension in the 50s, at least in America. We felt constrained without cause. We felt constrained without explanation. We just felt like we were being repressed for no reason. And as I've said several times on the show, we didn't have a rite of passage, right? So we didn't have a moment when a man becomes a man and a woman becomes a woman. And so we just burst, like, again, it's that expressing yourself thing. We just burst out of our shell in any weird way that we can. And that's when rock and roll happened. And rock and roll was severely frowned on by the parents of the day because it made the kids lose control of themselves. And the parents of the day knew, well, if our kids lose control, then it's just one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. The utter worship of a of a musician went to all new, whole new levels, right? By the 60s, we get the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and right? And one thing did lead to another, right? The government drops this chemical called LSD, and we all start tripping. And that just ripped apart the minds of kids to understand that the universe is a lot bigger than we think it is. It's a lot more peaceful than we think it is. And on down the line. And then things sort of tightened back up after the 70s. The government demonized LSD and made it illegal because it was an anti-war drug. And they make their living and they get their power from wars. Sex, well, that was out of the box. But running around doing free love, where these hippies would be in communes and just trade each other's bodies. We got venereal diseases. So that slowed that down. The love drug, LSD, was replaced by cocaine, which made everyone hyper and tended to destroy their lives, whereas LSD improved your life, right? And in the 70s, I think, things sort of started melting down into the pot and became sort of the America 2.0. Morals seemed to solidify a little bit better. We did advance the envelope quite a bit, right? So premarital sex was now completely cool. Pornography, which had been around since the beginning of time, right? I think one of the very first movie reels ever filmed within the first year of video cameras existing was a porn. But pornography really blew up in the 70s. And it would seem that all the major cultural changes of America, which can be explained by a sociology professor or a historian, were all related to the constraints on man freeing themselves. And you can sit around and say, rah, rah, that was occurring. But what I want to suggest in this show is that every change that's related to time has a vector. It's change over time. And so there's a line and there's a direction that the vector is going. And for instance, if we were to get into a spaceship and just randomly go up in a particular angle, then we have a vector of our momentum. And that will either take us to the moon, if it's in the way of our path, or it might take us to a star a gazillion years, light years away, if space truly exists. So every single change that we made from the mid-50s up till today have had these vectors. And there were people that were smart enough to say, look, it's not that I'm trying to keep you from expressing yourself and from freeing yourself, but have we stepped back from all these changes and looked at where they're going? And what's going to happen 100 years from now if this keeps going in that direction, right? There's an author named Huxley who wrote a book, I believe in 1939, called Brave New World. And what's utterly phenomenal about this is that the backstory is that he got access to the plans of the ruling class. I'm not sure which clique he was in, and I'm not sure if the story's true. But if you read the book, you might start believing it. And he wrote about a futuristic world that was really hard to believe being fathomed in 39. Children just had sex willy-nilly. They took sedative pills every day, keep them docile. It was a weird-ass book. And that was an author who took a concept and moved it forward. And why he didn't get lynched for that book in 39, I don't know. I mean, geez, there's nothing like it that I know of. I mean, 1984 came out, but that was more tyrannical, draconian stuff, right? And boy, was that guy dead on, because it's happened before. But what I'm concerned about today, we always talk about mind control being sort of a multifaceted thing, right? It comes at you from all angles of the world. But one of them that comes at you is through Hollywood and television, through the scripts that you watch and the themes in the scripts that you watch, right? It also comes in the form of just simply exposing you to things that shock you. And, Howard Stern can teach anyone that you might be a person who is a sort of adrenaline junkie and dopamine junkie, and he is there to shock you by providing imagery and circumstances and situations that are very cathartic and wild. Now, he sort of turned into a one-trick pony at this point. My God, I've only done this show for 1 year, and I'm almost out of ideas, and this guy's been going for 30 years. So hats off to Howard Stern for what he does, right? I'm not endorsing what he does, because I don't know what he does anymore. But I'm trying to put this into words in a way that we can all sort of agree that this exists, this circumstance exists. And this is how, I'm going to see if I can do it right now. I don't think any one of us believe that any one of these changes in the moral fiber of our society as dictated to us by Hollywood, television, music, any sort of cultural outlet can go unabated, unrestricted forever. Because I think we all agree that at some point it takes us away from the core fiber that we have fought so hard to put into a system. How long did it take to go from, say, the Roman days where things were much more loosey-goosey, or even before that when it was the biggest man in the village with the biggest stick could sleep with any one of the women, and it could be you or your mother or your sister. And hey, if he didn't like how she screamed during rape, he could just kill her and have sex with her dead body, blah, blah, blah. Sounds horrible, right? Well, if we keep some of these paths going, well, we're dismantling society. We're dismantling any constraints. And we have, ACLU groups that come out and defend every single thing. And now we have restrooms that can't be separated by gender. I think probably what we have to do is go to single gender restrooms if we're ever going to pull this off, because we can't make anyone agree. And just so you know, a lot of European bathrooms are that way. Some of the major cities have them too. And there's areas where, there's kiddie bathrooms and there's adults bathrooms, right? But you close the door in the stall and no one gets to see what you're doing. Sounds horrific to me because I think men go to the bathroom a lot different than women. And quite frankly, even if that's not the case, I don't want to hear a woman, very loudly going to the bathroom. I just don't want to know that happens. I want to think that my women are dainty, beautiful creatures, and I'm the one having, an explosive situation. Call me old-fashioned. But I'm going to go after pornography first to kind of show you where this might be headed, because everybody knows about it. If you're over 20, I would assume that there's a 99% chance you've seen some in your lifetime, and there's probably a 90% chance you wanted to see it, at least the very first time. You may not like it in the first 10 seconds and never like it again, but at some point you wanted to see what it was all about, right? Pre-sex, post-sex, doesn't even matter. Sex is obviously like food. You have to do it, otherwise your family doesn't go on. There are chemical structures in a person's body that in a teen realm, when we normally started having sex, as soon as a woman menstruated, they could have babies, right? So it's crazy. Some girls menstruate at 7. It's just hard to believe them having sex to have kids. But in villages and stuff, as soon as the boy could do his thing and the girl could do her thing, they would get together and they could have kids in their 10s. It just blows my mind, right? But there's a point where we all know we're going to go and do it, right? And then there's a later point in the 30s where the women get this "I must have a baby" thing, which is wild. My friends with the most adversarial views on having children who tell me I'm never having kids, and they're like, I said, how old are you? 31. I said, we'll give it 2 years. Sure enough, married with the kid in 2 years. Just, lamenting, drunk, which is very lucid and honest. Unfortunately, when you get drunk, you get really honest about your life. And I'm glad they did, right? Because I'm glad that these are good people that should spawn. But pornography started out with sort of an above-board heterosexual set of pornography, and then the below-the-board set of homosexual pornography. One of the famous guys, John Holmes, who was a 70s, 80s porn star, he died of AIDS because he was gay and he was having unprotected sex with men. That's how he died, right? Now, obviously, it's a very touchy subject, so I'm not going to really cast aspersions on this, but we now know through a lot of child actors that pedophilia utterly exploded in Hollywood in the 80s. And it's probably always existed to some degree. I know a lot of people in Hollywood that are older, and they said there was definitely a contingency of homosexual men in Hollywood who just had their own parties, their own world, and it was all sort of, no kids involved, right? And then we have Corey Feldman, Corey Haim. We now have Elijah Wood, all talking about how they're passed around. And it's oddly little boys, right? And now you have to wonder where that became the commonplace thing. Because sort of the unthinkable became so thinkable that now we have dozens of famous actors who are now in their 30s or 20s looking back and saying, yeah, this stuff is ruthless. And because the law has been passed to protect pedophiles, there's actually a statute of limitations that protects a pedophile. Can you believe that? That's what Corey Feldman said. He goes, look, I can't name names because they could sue me now because it's been so many years that being raped by an adult when I was a child can't be discussed. You can no longer press charges. It's like, wow, how's that possible? Oh, because maybe a pedophile wrote the law, right? Teen pregnancy. There's always been teen pregnancy, probably since we thought teen pregnancy was bad. Then it continued, and we thought it was bad. It was okay because everyone was getting pregnant in their teens, and then, like we're saying, under 18, right? But now we have sex and everything. And, if you haven't watched Rome from HBO, you have themes where you have Julius Caesar had like epilepsy or something like that, and there was a scene where he almost started having a fit. They pushed him in a closet, and his young nephew went in with him with this older man, and nephew didn't know what was going on. They stuff a leather belt in his mouth so he doesn't swallow his tongue. And there was a maid or a cook outside, a woman in the kitchen, hearing all this ruckus in the closet, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. She can't get inside, obviously. And then out pops Caesar with this little boy, and the guy, I guess, stayed in there. And she immediately accuses Caesar of being a pedophile. And that's a little sneaky way to get that in there. Man can have sex with boy. Then there's a few places in the show where people are procuring prostitutes. And, it would be, they'd bring in the line of women to have sex. And there'd be boys in there too. And I'm not talking about, demonizing homosexuality. I'm not trying to personally judge anything, but what I'm trying to say is it goes on and on and on. Luckily, porn has sort of slowed down, I think, for people. And the conversation I had about it recently with some grown females was that the intimacy in the room for a couple these days is greatly impaired due to porn. Depending on your guy, whether or not he is obsessed in pornographic material or not, it starts to erode what a man believes is appropriate in the bed. It starts to erode what a man thinks a woman really wants. And, very few women that I know really get caught up in it, and thank God we have at least a rock, but some women get caught up in it too. And hey, if everyone in the room is totally for what you're doing and not breaking any weird laws, then go for it, But we got on this discussion that there are certain things that used to be very intimate before pornographic material became online. And it was like, you kind of had this feeling that this is just something that two people do only if they're really in love. I won't go into the details, but you can pick a few things probably, right? And once those things were usurped by porn, right? And it became commonplace in porn, let's put it that way, then all of a sudden, those very special things became smutty and dark. Because as long as you've seen someone do exactly that same thing and not respect the other person, then you realize you're doing association, picture association in your mind, and then it attaches to emotions that aren't genuine because these actors are being paid to do this, right? Now, if you followed a lot of the porn stars that get out of the porn business and go back and talk about it, usually females, of course, you find out that they were drugged to high heaven. I once helped a porn star build a website for a business, and I didn't know she was a porn star when I met her, but she talked about it on the phone with me at length one night for probably a couple hours. This is like nearly 20 years ago. And she said, I did this, it made me money, but now she goes, I'm out there forever doing these things. And even though I'm not that popular, she actually was, in her era, she was very popular. She said, I can't erase it. I can't take control of my identity anymore. And she goes, you got to know, they hooked me on blow really fast and speed and all kinds of stuff. And that's why I was willing to do anything for the next hit. And luckily she didn't look at me, see it or anything. She's a very voluptuous woman. But I've talked to these people personally. But I think now what blows my mind is that it seems as if every person you meet in public could be a porn star or have made one, right? It only matters if it really matters to you, quite frankly, right? I'm not judging. But once you start having children, you start having those worries, especially if you have a little girl, right? And you start worrying about, well, shit, is my kid going to, be taken advantage of by a boy who thinks that all these things that these women who do extreme things for money, is he going to think that she wants to do that? Or is she going to get hooked up in a situation that's more toxic, like the sheriff of Orange County about 15 years ago? His son grabbed a girl out of a party. I think she was even mentally handicapped, and a bunch of boys raped her. But one of them was the sheriff's son, and so when it came out that this girl was raped, and the sheriff figured out it was his son, they tried to cover it up. It blew up in his face. The sheriff got fired. A bunch of great police officers got fired. You have a friend of mine that got caught up in that. And they just said, clean this place out. Get rid of all these people. So because of that one sheriff's son, I can tell you at least half a dozen police officers who were the most upstanding guys on planet Earth lost their jobs and were essentially falsely blacklisted because they were just near the sheriff in the work circle, right? No evidence of having participated in anything negative, right? No cover-up or anything like that. But you're not allowed to pull it back, right? You're not allowed to come out and say, maybe we should not let this go as far as it's gone, because we do have freedom of speech, right? Luckily, there have been some regulations about making sure when you go to a website that has a sensitive material, it's supposed to warn you and say, are you over 18? Obviously, that's not much of a constraint. And we don't want a bunch of draconian laws that use porn to create other tyrannical control mechanisms, right? But now let's look at violence for 1 second. Because Larry Flint said something very, very interesting, and which was portrayed by Woody Harrelson in the movie they made about him, that as long as you're talking about violence, somehow that can be broadcast on television. Even in the 70s, you could show dismembered bodies and bloody sheets and describe to the nth detail the destructive force of war or murder. And it was okay because it sold, I guess, sponsorship slots on television, right? Lots of eyeballs looking at your product. Marshall McLuhan said the reason why television went dark in the late 60s was that the news agencies learned that by portraying reality super duper dark, if the next thing that you see is an advertisement that says Coca-Cola is great, you're no longer thinking of war, you will gravitate towards the Coke brand as a mechanism of relief from this horrific world that you live in. Now, I think he was dead on. It's obviously not just Coke, it's just whomever's buying the advertising, right? And I believe that's still the case to this day. But the obsession with war, the obsession with violence is quite unbelievable. And I will absolutely, positively say that I have been down that path. And I want to admit, too, just to make sure, full disclosure here, I went through the porn phase. Absolutely. One, I had access to it in my house as a kid, not because I was given permission to see it, but because I would find it, right? And my dad was what happens is your dad's buddy brings the crap over, and your dad just goes, okay, I don't want you to think I'm weird, so I'm just going to put this over here because we're sure as hell not going to watch this together, right? And then I would find those tapes and stuff, right? But when I moved to Northern California is when I walked into a store looking to rent a normal movie, walked through this curtain. It wasn't even a curtain. I walked around a wall, and I was over 18. I'm looking around. I'm going, oh my God, this must have been 3,000-4,000 pornographic videos. And when you just see that for the first time with no adult next to you to give you reference for what's going on, the consequences to your soul and your relationships, you're just hormones, man. And especially as a male. We're supposed to conquer every woman. We're supposed to spread our seed, right? And so I went through a phase where, yeah, I saw everything, and I would not recommend it for anyone at all. And the Hindus, just to finish up before we go back to war, the Hindus have a very interesting definition of why you shouldn't masturbate. Now, obviously, I'm not telling you not to masturbate, but keep this in mind. And have promiscuous sex. They're the two things. I had this described in a documentary by one guy. I think it's on Netflix, too. The guy said, once you fantasize about a woman that you know, especially, doing things that you have decided she wants to do, if in real life she doesn't want to do it, you start to resent her. but it's all made out of your imagination. So that's why masturbating can be very dangerous. It can also make you want things from person A because you fantasized about it with person B, or maybe you even saw two people do it and you're just watching in your mind. So he goes, that's why it's one reason why it's dangerous. But now get this. This is cool. He says every time you have sex with someone and you orgasm, he says your souls touch. And when your souls touch, you exchange part of your souls, and you have a connection with that person for the rest of your existence. He says, therefore, when you find the person that you love, your soul's already been given to a bunch of different people. And if you wanted to give your soul 100% to the person that is your true love, you can't do it. It's physically impossible, which is why you never feel completely and utterly connected to a person if you've had a lot of promiscuous sex. And I have to say, it's hard to quantify that in your own thought process, but I think they're right. I absolutely think they're right. To the degree that you've done something before someone, it's a little tough to completely connect because and this is what I tell my buddies. I say, look, my warning is this. Let's say you had sex with 6 people, and it wasn't all bad. And let's just not mince words. The people that you have sex with, one girl, if you're a dude, let's make it generic. The person that you're with will do something to you or allow you to do something to them that is like, wow, unbelievable. No one's ever allowed me to do that, or no one's ever done this to me. That's amazing. You go to the next person, and there's a different thing, just exactly like that. And then there's a person that doesn't. You're like, boo-hoo. You go to the next person. Oh, you get a little bit of that back of what the girl did three persons before, the person 3 persons before. And then you meet the right one. They have the perfect family. They have the perfect look for you, the perfect personality for you. They laugh when you laugh. They like the same shows. You're totally compatible. Then you have sex. And some of that stuff doesn't show up in the bedroom. In fact, the person that you like goes, I don't do that. Now, if you've been bitten by the dragon for those things, which means this is just this thing you like, and they don't do it, you might not commit to that person and have a wonderful life with that person because they don't do that one thing. Or you do it, but you kind of always resent them, and now you're prone to infidelity because you want that thing. You're like, I just need that thing on the side where that person gives me that thing that I had with the other person. And porn, I think, exacerbates the living shit out of those problems for us. So I think that's like wisdom down to anyone else. That's information I wish I had been told before I get engaged in this kind of stuff, right? Again, life is life. You're going to do what you're going to do. We're all going to make mistakes, so no judgment, right? War. All right, I did a whole episode on war. If you want to know where man was with war, there's a couple things I want to point you to. If you go look at movies from the 1930s and up, pretty much stopping around, I don't know, the 80s, killing someone was a really big deal. Now, sure, there were gangster movies about Chicago, but there was a reason why Chicago, which is still the most violent city in America, was kind of a weird oddity of violence. But killing someone was not a knee-jerk feeling like it is today, right? Today, it's sort of like, well, if you do that, I'll kill you. Just boom. It's just not a big jump from our morality base today to that ultimate act of taking someone's life, right? The very first rule of common law. Thou shalt not kill. But now think about it. If you heard that your neighbor killed someone, and just pick a neighbor in your brain. In fact, one you think that is fairly passive. You'll have that little bit of shock, but then you have to think, well, I guess that's plausible, right? I guess that's possible. But in the end, 40, 50 years ago, sure as hell wasn't plausible. It was shock for a few days, weeks, months, maybe the rest of your life. Can't believe that the principal killed that teacher. The problems of the past were much more fundamental. Infidelity in my hometown was negligible. If anyone cheated on someone, like adult to adult, man, everyone found out, and you were essentially scarlet lettered, and good luck getting any customer service or help from anybody. Good luck getting a bank loan, right? You're the scumbag that cheats on his wife or cheats on her husband, and I think you're going to pay back this loan. You like cheating. You like signing up for vows and signing up for an agreement, and then you have no moral problem not fulfilling that commitment. So why would I give you a loan? You've shown the fabric that you're unworthy of commitment and trust, right? I made video games forever. I have to say, I never worked on a game that was, purely like blood and gore. Most of it was like spaceship fighting, racing cars, boxing, official boxing, fantasy, MMOs, or maybe it's like medieval time fighting. When I started my own company, we really didn't have a lot of depth because we were making online casual games, multiplayer online casual games. So it was not a lot of that. Our customers were like, Marvel and EA and that kind of stuff. But I watched and didn't understand that the gaming industry was essentially being lured into war games. And I think it was very chiefly due to the need for preparing a bunch of our young people for the retaliation as a result of 9/11. And it started out in the late 90s, because I used to review video games in the late 90s, and I had a little website that was using all my reviews. Used to get all the betas from every single company on planet Earth of all the games, early releases, and I play them, finish them, and then review them. And it was essentially the birth of war games, like World War II games, in the late 90s. And then it went modern warfare. The new Call of Duties, right? Call of Duty was a World War II game when it first came out, and I think it was phenomenal. We have Modern Warfare, Black Ops, Ghost Recon, all these crazy, amazing games. And it essentially prepared our kids for death. And, if you go back to 1993, you have Castle Wolfenstein, Doom 1, 2, and 3, Quake 1, 2, and 3, where you're essentially in hell being bombarded with satanic imagery, and you're fighting and killing, and you're seeing horrific stuff, bodies all cut up and filleted on hooks. And parents weren't really involved because in the front room was a Super Nintendo playing Mario Brothers, like little goofy, beautiful arcade games, right? So that's what the parents would see. But as soon as the computer launched in the back room, Satan himself showed up and you had to kill him, right? So you're always sort of the hero, but man, you're being bombarded with imagery which shakes down your moral fiber, right? Shakes down what you're used to seeing. I said to you that I met a woman at a game developers conference from England who works on essentially their equivalent of Area 51. And she wanted to interview me about why kids lust, or what psychological mechanisms we use when we design video games to make them potentially lust for war. And she gave me like this huge Word document, which I keep saying I need to find that document. I don't remember any of the keywords of the document. I don't remember what the document said. And I've since archived all my emails, and so I'd have to unarchive them, look through them. But it was phenomenal. It was too many questions. I literally had to tell her, like, I don't have time for this. I'm running a video game company. I can't do this, right? But it was interesting that was their goal. Television, like Kyle always says, has cop worshiping shows. Well, we definitely want to respect our police officers. But it gets to the point, it's a mechanism by which these shows start off usually with a pretty horrific death. And if you've ever been involved with writing projects, you realize that if you were to write season 1, you write someone's dead on the ground, and they're going to show the camera. There's going to show that. Maybe you get away with the tarp and a bloody hand sticking out of the tarp on your first episode. By the middle episode, you have to have a bullet through the head. You have to have a blue makeup on some actor, or maybe some horrifically dismembered prop body. And then by the last show of the first season, you're going to have to show the murder actually occur. And it's going to be something like, Brad Pitt's movie 7, which again showed you sort of satanic, horrific mutilation deaths. Here's how I want you to look at this. There's that old game that someone used to play with us when we were kids, and that would be one of these games that was where someone would make you look, right? Made you look. And at first it was just an innocent game of tricking you to look at something, anything, positive, negative, doesn't matter. And then it turned into the internet, and the internet sort of turned into this, I made you look. And it got to the point where, especially now, I think it's in an utter overdrive phase where someone will find a horrific picture. They'll take horrific pictures of themselves, and they'll post them online in a form where you will slip into them. Oops, made you look. They will send you spam emails that link off to things that say, made you look, and they'll trick you into thinking that your bank statement or whatever. Thank God, I think I've conquered most of this stuff. Man, I've fallen for some of them related to games that I play. But television is a big I made you look. Movies are a big I made you look. And part of it is to expose you to rituals and things that will shake down your moral fiber. I just saw Zoolander 2 a couple weeks ago. And, it's nothing I would have actually paid to see. But Zoolander 2 is sort of like Zoolander meets Eyes Wide Shut meets Da Vinci Code. And the things that you witness in there, it's a pretty playful movie. It's pretty funny in some areas, actually, because I had no expectations. It was a hell of a lot better than I thought it was going to be, and I didn't pay money to see it. But I felt like by the time it was over, it was exposing a younger audience to a bunch of stuff they shouldn't see. Or maybe we should see if we want to wake up out of some of the comas that we're in. Rome, which is a fabulous freaking show, let me tell you. It's just a lighthearted show, but I just thought it was great. Just has a lot of debauchery, let's just put it that way, and death, and incredible murders, and assassinations and things. And I just think that America has been dismantled from a moral fiber standpoint to the point that we don't think anymore about doing horrific things. We don't think anymore about put this way, we've had the expectations of our children reduced. It used to be, it's really funny. This is what I wanted to mention when talking about television, eroding. There was a series in the 70s that I watched the hell out of called Good Times. It's about a black family in New York, living in the projects, and there was a episode. They went through all these. Janet Jackson was in it when she was a little girl. One of the main characters' name's JJ, and I forget his real name. But he said the word, dynamite, and the whole planet would come unloose. Right? It was phenomenal. Brilliant writing. But there was an episode where he was getting solicited to join a New York gang. It's supposed to have been like 77, 78, something like that, I think. And the episode was about these guys that said, we're gonna brawl with this other gang. And that's how we get going. And used to be back in the day, you just fisticuffs. You just beat each other up until you can't beat each other up anymore. Nobody dies. And the first layer of crossing the line within one of those brawls would someone would bring out a switchblade knife. And now you're talking about potentially killing someone, right? The most deadly weapon in the world is a piercing object, a knife, because there's no need for ammunition and there's no need for training. You just stick someone with it, and there's a really good likelihood they're going to bleed out or internally bleed to death, right? But the big thing in this episode was that they wanted JJ to use a gun. And they said, you got to be in our gang, and if you want to be in our gang, you got to use this gun, and we're going to have this brawl, and if it doesn't go right, we're going to use this gun. Something like that. And of course, at the very end, he gets exposed, and he didn't want to use the gun at all, but it was this big deal that he was going to have a gun involved with the gang. Now think about it. Think about that being done today in a theme for some show today. Kid goes in, gets solicited by a gang, and they want him to use a gun. Would you even flinch? Wouldn't you turn off the TV and think, wow, that was a corny-ass episode? 40 years ago, it was unthinkable. That was the twist. It was unthinkable that a gun was going to be used, but nowadays, Jesus. I was listening to one of my favorite musicians, a guy named Dog Master with two G's. He creates this cool Zap Roger music, but he is, I can sort of tell he can't think for himself as well as he's a master musician, because he goes off and creates beats for these gangster rappers, like just today, like modern day gangster rappers. And I was listening to this one track. In the first paragraph, this rapper comes on, because he's not a rapper, he's just a musician. And the rapper starts talking about, he's got to call women bitches in the first sentence. And he talks about, he pulls out his gun and he pop, right? This is modern day music, as if any of that shit is profound, right? Too Short's been calling women bitches since the 80s. NWA talked about gunslinging in 89. It's 2016, and this is what actually gets published in iTunes, right? Cliche after cliche. That's what this stuff's turned into. And isn't it amazing that something that would be utterly horrific 40 years ago is now a cliche? You know? Wow, what have we done to this planet? Is it so hard to believe that they can get us to do anything horrific anymore? I think the answer is no. The reason why I want to do this episode is the following. I think we are being bullied in a way. I hate to overuse that word because it's sort of a victim word, right? I'm being bullied. But there are bullies, right? And I think society has gotten to a point where there's this weird duality going on, right? Men are turning into complete pussies. Even the ones that say they're straight. But we have no problem talking about war and men going off and killing the living shit out of foreign countries. How do those two things coincide? At least in the 90s, everybody was hard. In the 80s, everybody was soft and happy, right? We weren't soft and, well, maybe, I don't know, we were wearing spandex and had long hair and putting makeup on our faces and stuff. I never did that, but I had short hair back in the day too. But the idea is, how are we going down two tracks at once? The utter feminization of our men, which means they're sort of unworthy to be fathers, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Because I think a boy needs to become a man. Because the world has manly challenges and manly requirements, right? You're no longer raised as a boy that you're going to have to provide for your family. It's, well, find some government program to suckle off of, right? Women, I don't know. I'm not a woman. I think that it would be hard for me to generalize anything I think I've seen out of women. They're definitely still feminine, you know. I think entitlement is diseased both sides of the fence. I can't think there's any one sex that has that put on them. But I just think as a society, what's interesting is I was talking to a girl on Memorial Day, I guess over this weekend, and she knows about deep thoughts. I told her about it, and she goes, you know what? I want to watch your shows, but she goes, you have to understand that when I hear about all that conspiracy stuff coming from you, I believe it. It scares me. It scares me that kind of stuff goes on, and I don't want to know that stuff goes on. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, how do you know that stuff is going on and it freaks you out? And if I talk about it, really freaks you out, like knowing all the rules of what rules you freaks you out. But you turn the television on and all that stuff is happening in fictional themes right in front of your face. So TV is okay, movies are okay, but if someone lucidly comes up to you and says, here's the real deal, somehow that's more terrifying. So we're living in a bizarre, chaotic whirlwind of sort of a, if morality has a fiber to it, a consistency to it, a theme to it, a standard to it, integrity, then we're living in the first few seconds of an atomic bomb blowing the living shit out of what used to be the fiber that we lived by, that we defined ourselves by. How many of you look at photographs of baseball stadiums, right? And the baseball stadium has, I don't know, 3 or 4,000 people watching a baseball game, and everyone's wearing a suit and a tie and a hat. The women are wearing dresses and hats. Everyone. The only people not totally dressed up are the people selling you popcorn and hot dogs. I don't think I could possibly tell you that I think the world got better. It's okay to experiment, I think. We need to feel freedoms where we haven't felt them before, but in the end, I think that we're... I think that a lot of us are bringing it back, right? I think a lot of you, probably the majority of the world, obviously, still adheres to traditional philosophies of goodness, right? Of course. But what I want to do with this episode is heighten your awareness of made-you-look imagery. Again, what was the movie Seven? If you haven't seen it, go see it. Not with your kids around, right? Not if you're prone to have nightmares. But I'll just tell you the premise of the story is that there's a serial killer loose. And I think it's Kevin Spacey's the killer, and Brad Pitt's the detective looking for him. And what it is there's a countdown, I think, to 7 bodies that are killed, and it's sort of a numerology, sort of zodiac-y kind of guy that is killing based on a set of rules he's developed from some cult. And so they're able to predict, once they figure out the formula, who's going to be killed next, where, and when, and all that stuff, right? It has a horrific final act. Just gross, The whole concept of the final act is horrific. But every single death scene is at a made-you-look moment where they're going to show the camera. My first film has one of these, and I was borrowing from that, nonsensically so. But once you have things exposed to you that you can't unsee, it becomes a part of your fiber that you can't delete. And I think that that's where it gets a little scary, because it becomes a part of us. Now, if you're a man and you're more of the traditional man definition, I don't care what part of the world you come from, you might say, well, like I had an opinion once. I met a few guys in my lifetime before I was 25 who had seen horrific situations, car accidents especially. Some of them had, fires. And they explained losing their lunch and losing their ability to assist because they were so horrified by what they saw. It freaked them out. And once I heard those stories, I said to myself, well, I don't want to be that guy. If I come onto a car accident and someone is bleeding out and there's horrific imagery around me and someone's on fire screaming, but I can't save that person, but I can save the person who's managed to crawl out and they're smoking, I want to be effective. And so I actually went online and exposed myself to some horrific stuff. And it took me probably a couple decades to get those visions out of my mind on a routine basis. Even to this day, I got to sit here and remember what I saw, which is good, right? But I think that I will probably be effective if I ever run into that situation. Not that I ever want to, right? But I go eat Indian food from time to time. And what's utterly fascinating is that my Indian restaurant, like most Indian restaurants, or a lot of them, play Bollywood. They're all musicals, right? All their movies are musicals, these crazy dance numbers. It's like they communicate in song. And some of them are old, and so you're looking at 1985, 95 stuff. You're like, okay, yeah, I remember America was very similar to that back in those days. But even the most modern stuff, it's a little more serious, but these people are absolutely sweet human beings. And they dance in moves and dance in ways that would be considered very feminine in America. And I think part of me just goes, what a shame. Like, I would never dance like that. But what a shame that you can't be your own spirit and be good. But we've eroded everything down such that is not allowed. One of the funniest videos you can see is, I think you can look it up, where you look up Indian condom advertisement, something like those 3 things together. And there was a birth control initiative in India where they wanted people to use condoms, but people didn't use condoms, didn't know what they were. They just didn't know anything about them, whether it was going to kill you or whatever, and what it protected you from. And so they created this dance number, probably about 6 guys dressed up in these condoms, head to toe. And they created this really cute song that explained all of the uses of condoms. And they kept just singing the song over and over in different locations. It's hysterical to watch anyway. But it just shows you the moral fiber of these people. And like I said in the other episode, I'll probably air this one first. I've got all these ones in the queue again. God damn it. Third world nations are just often very cute and very peaceful and very wonderful. And it's these first world nations that are used as Thor's hammer for the world banks to take over countries. And we're the super intellectual war machine. You know, what's wild is, I hate even making this analogy, but, you know, there's this, when you study the Nazis from World War II, you obviously have this horrific event called the Holocaust, which, again, you can debate all the numbers all you want, but people are incarcerated and hundreds of thousands of people, even in the most conservative estimate, died, up to 6.2, right, million. But regardless of that ending, which again pales in comparison to Stalin and Mao, and there are tens of millions of deaths that they caused in their own people, they were this amazing war machine. The most efficient submarines, tanks, guns, their clothing. The American soldiers have their Nazi helmets, just a little bit more rounded out nowadays, right? We stole every piece of mechanical and strategic know-how from the Nazis and developed the American military. But we wave our American flag, and overall we stayed extremely moral for a really, really long time until something called 9/11 shook out our belief system that there are morals that we keep. Our very fabric of what we believe to be freedom has been destroyed. We believe we should give it all up to stay protected. Ha ha ha, right? Our kids now engage in wars that we believe are good, which I always talk about on all the shows, right? I believe that there's an effort to make sure that third world countries don't infect us with goodness. We can't know that there's a whole society of billions and billions of people between Asia and India, regardless if they're repressed by a communist regime or have some form of faux democracy. We're not allowed to see them be nice to each other. We're just not. And I think that's super duper sad. And so let's just think about our grandparents. Let's think about where we are today. Let's think about the stuff that we talk about today and the stuff that we see today that is our entertainment, the stuff that we expose our children to, or would expose our children to if we had any, right? For those of you who don't have kids. Would we show our grandparents that stuff? And if the answer is no, then why not? It used to be that I know that some grandparents are fairly hip, and they, especially Gen X or grandparents, but you have to go up to whatever the hell the baby boomer grandparents, right? Their parents, the baby boomers' parents. They would. I think I remember stories where they even said, well, if my mother knew I did this, she would have a cow, and then just every single century that goes by, there's that analogy, and that's always going to probably be true. And it's obviously not always super negative. It's just cultural differences and that sort of thing. But you keep going back thousands of years, and the way they lived in Rome was definitely not acceptable today, right? So I hope this was valuable. This is just, I really want us to pay attention to social norms that we have today and see where is society going to be if all that continues as a vector in one direction. We don't debate it. We don't talk about it really, unless we're having some, heated discussion / mudslinging conversation on Facebook or something, right? I think we need to have very intimate conversations about this with our friends, with our family members, and just see if there's something that maybe we don't agree with, but we never really thought about not agreeing with. I'm right there with you, man. I mean, I watched all these shows and was like, I thankfully, I don't think I exposed my kid to any of that stuff. But I know she gets exposed to it. But my kids are really good kid, really kind soul. I think maybe that's part of it, right? And luckily her mom didn't either, you know. I think that's it. All right, well, I got 5 more that'll get me to 100. I may have even more than 5. I'm not sure. Some of them I don't like, and so I just won't do them. I'm going to be releasing one on reinventing yourself. I'll probably put this one out today. I made this one today, and I'll put it out today, which is the day after Memorial Day. But I've got like at least 4 others probably in the queue. But I have one that's going to be reinventing yourself, and the computer wasn't plugged in, so I lost audio. So I have beefed up the camera audio for about 7 minutes. So when you listen to the episode, it's going to get kind of crunchy for a while, and then it'll go back to the nice smooth 58 mic. So anyway, the viewership has suddenly exploded over Memorial Day. Really wild stuff, right? So I'm more than privileged. Some of you guys are really passing in your compliments and comments, and I really appreciate it. So hope we're connecting, hope making the world a better place. Again, part of enlightenment, the first stage of enlightenment is discussion. I think that's what we're doing here, right? And, please leave your comments and your impressions about things on all the videos, because I think there's a lot of you just wanting to know if someone else believes this. If they just hear it from me, and you thumb up the video because you dig it, but you don't leave a comment about why you dig it, right? They may just feel like, what's that one guy, and I'm the only other guy on planet Earth that believes that this is something we should talk about. But if you happen to thumb it up, which means it engaged you at some point, please leave a comment, not to give me any accolades whatsoever, but just to share the thought process, because there's been so many conversations where people thumbed up something, and then they start talking about it and giving their own impressions, and someone else will reply, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. I think that's real important. So anyway, if you haven't gone already, go to mkultraradio.com to go back and get all the old episodes, right? Every podcast reader on planet Earth only goes back a few episodes. Even the best one I've got on my phone, Podcast Addict, only goes back like 30 episodes. Well, we're about to hit 100, which means 70 videos are not going to be, or audio pieces aren't going to be accessible to you. YouTube is also a great place to do it, where you actually get to see me sit in my backyard talking to the listener that just saw me. I think he calls himself GP or something like that. I thought it was hilarious. He said, dude, I've been listening to you for a year and I never watched a video. And he goes, you look totally different than I ever thought you would look. Totally hilarious, man. Love it. All right. I think that's it. Thanks for making it this far. Subscribe if you dig it. Thumbs up if you dig it. And I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Take care of yourself and someone else. Over now.